The Civil War was over 150 years ago, but there's still a lot of animosity and a lot of differences between the North and the South that divide them, but a lot of these are based on stereotypes and myths. So what we're going to try and do is shed some facts on this to try and dispel some of those myths and maybe, just maybe, help the two sides understand each other a little better. So first of all, about me. Well, what qualifies me to have anything to say about this? Well, I grew up in Harlan, Kentucky. I lived in Tennessee for a little while, and then eventually I moved to the greater Philadelphia area where I went into complete culture shock because stuff was so completely different. But after 9 years, I have acclimated here, so I have some unique perspective on the differences between life down there and life up here. First of all, let's talk about some important definitions going into this that are going to help us understand exactly what we're talking about. First of all, a stereotype. That's assuming that all people of a certain group or classification all have the same characteristics or qualities. In other words, every one of them up there are all just like this. Or all of those people down there are exactly like this. See, that's a stereotype because you're putting them all in the same category. Also, there's the word culture. Now, this is just talking about the way of life in a particular area. It's not to be confused with the alternate connotation of artsy-fartsiness, saying, ooh, she really likes classical music and the ballet. She must really be into culture. Also, just because you have an arrogant disdain for a particular culture doesn't mean that it's not a culture. So when we talk about the culture of the South, don't laugh. It really is a culture. So first of all, we're going to look at some stereotypes. In particular, we're going to look at some self-stereotypes, where North or the South are putting themselves on some kind of pedestal because they have stereotyped themselves to be some certain way. So first of all, in the South, we're all nice and hospitable to everybody down here. Well, unless they're black, Mexican, gay, from the North, anywhere outside the U.S., and or they don't share your political or religious beliefs. Also, it tends to be that you're just nice to people's face and then talk about them like a dog as soon as they turn around. I used to work in IT support, and some of the nicest people I've ever dealt with were the salespeople from the southern offices. They were just as nice as pie on the phone. And then you turn around, they would stab you in the back, behead you, and they would take your quickening in 5 seconds. See, that's contrary to the belief that, oh, if they don't like you in the South, they won't have anything to do with you. No, they're just nice, then backstab. Eek, 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 eek. The next Southern self-stereotype. We're a lot more laid back and relaxed down here. Now, that might be true to an extent, but on the negative side, some adjectives that could be applied to that are lazy, less professional, less driven, and generally just care less about the quality of the work. Good enough is good enough. Hey, here's what I mean by that. A couple of years ago, I went down to Kentucky to see my family, and I was staying in a hotel for about a week and a half, so I had to go to the laundromat to do my laundry. And so I shoved all my clothes in this big giant machine. I put all my money into it, and the machine broke halfway through. And somebody said, oh yeah, honey, that thing's been broke for about 2 weeks now. I'm like, they didn't put a sign on it? They didn't, what? So, you know, stuff like that probably wouldn't fly in the North because somebody would have absolutely thrown a fit about the whole thing. And, well, anyway. On the positive side, though, Southerners can be a little bit easier to get along with, even if it is fake. For some reason, it's easier to get closer to people in the South, too, if they're your friends. You get to know them a little bit better. They're a little bit more open, a little bit less reserved. Northerners, on the other hand, will keep you at arm's length and will never let you get close to them, unless you're family or they've known you since you were kids. Okay, that might be a stereotype, but it's kind of true. Here's another one. We still believe in God down here, but you have no room for anybody else that's of any other religious persuasion, such as an atheist, a Catholic, a Jew, a Muslim, or anyone else who is not in that straight and narrow Protestant denomination path. Everybody else is going to burn in hell. Remember that whole thing, though, about God loved the whole world, that he did something. I remember I read that somewhere. I'm not sure where. So that segues nicely into the next slide. We're more American down here. except it was the southern states that broke away from the United States 150 years ago because they wanted to be their own nation who kept slaves. Remember that whole thing about God loved the whole world? I wonder how he felt about that whole thing. But anyway, now along with the American flag, a lot of you proudly wave your Confederate flag next to it. So you're real Americans, but you also support a 150-year-old failed rebellion against America. It's just part of our culture. Oh, okay, whatever, you know, that's fine. But how do you feel when a Puerto Rican guy drives by and he has his Puerto Rican flag in the back window of his car? Well, this is America, buddy. Freaking immigrants flying their flags. They're so proud of it, they need to go back where they came from. Well, yeah, first of all, Puerto Rico is the United States, but I digress. You're the one who was flying a foreign flag in your yard, not them, so whatever. Alright, now let's shine the light on northern self-stereotypes. We live in the best of civilization up here. I don't know how those people down in the middle of nowhere can stand it. When we talk about the suburban, overpriced, carriage house living, minivan driving, mall shopping, materialistic, shallow, self-centered people that consume 25% of the world's resources, we're probably talking about you. And there's nothing fun about traffic jams, not being able to see the stars from all the pollution, and dealing with people who are always in a freaking hurry to get somewhere, like work, soccer practice, piano recitals, yoga class, the gym, or whatever other part of your overcomplicated suburban life that you are so freaking proud of. We're not as ignorant and racist as those dumb people in the South. Well, unless the people we're talking about are black, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Asian, Indian, Russian, none of your specific Mediterranean culture, such as Italian, Greek, or Jewish, they're gay, they're from the South, or anywhere else outside the U.S., and or do not share your political or religious beliefs. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, you're just like people in the South, except you're here in the North, buddy. Also, your inner city schools suck, too. In the South, schools with higher funding, usually in the suburbs of big southern cities, are pretty good, and they produce students just as well educated as the students from the well-funded suburban schools of the North. However, in school districts with poor funding, the level of education is just as bad, if not way worse, than rural schools I have ever seen in the South. If you want more information on that, you should watch the documentary Waiting for Superman. Of course, now we're going to talk about some of the stereotypes that one side has about the other, and a lot of this might be overlap on some of the self-stereotypes and so on and so forth. Self-stereotypes where they're contrasting themselves from the other side. So let's delve into this. First of all, if we're talking about Southerners, a lot of people will say, well, they're all stupid and ignorant. Well, my first most direct response to that involves a song by CeeLo Green on the Lady Killer album, Turn to track 3. Also, as noted by Jeff Foxworthy, the problem is usually that the most stupid and ignorant are the ones that make their way onto TV. Also, pop culture has done nothing to dissuade the stereotype with movies like Deliverance. See, every time you talk about going in the South, somebody has to make that stupid banjo sound, because they're making fun of you. There's also Smokey and the Bandit and shows like Justified, which is actually about the town where I grew up, but honest to goodness, it's really not that bad. Or any other cartoonish portrayal of the people from the South. Also, as noted before, poor education is not exclusively a Southern phenomenon. Anywhere where lower income levels exist and therefore less tax revenue is going into the local school system, lower levels of education will exist, whether we're talking about rural Mississippi or the Bronx. And finally, the valedictorian of my high school class in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, is now a PhD at UCLA Berkeley, so there you go. Well, the next stereotype is Southerners. They're all a bunch of religious nuts. Well, once again, it is the most vocal to get the most attention, and there are a lot of nuts who happen to be religious in the South that do get a lot of media airtime. Many people in the South, though, have some very moderate, enlightened, well-informed religious beliefs that have nothing to do with religious extremism. Do extremists exist? You betcha. Are they the majority, though? No. So at least try to give them the same benefit of the doubt that maybe you would a Muslim person from the Middle East, well, until they give you a reason to prove themselves otherwise. Now, you northern enlightened people, you do give Middle Eastern people the benefit of the doubt, don't you? Also, what's your definition of a religious nut anyway? See, that depends on one's worldview. An atheist may think that anyone who is religious at all is a nut, and obviously the South is not the only place where you're going to find religious people either. Also, let's ask this question. If you're a religious person from the North, what differentiates your views from someone of the South? For example, if you're a Catholic, many would question your religious beliefs on the whole Holy Communion thing, or a litany of other church practices. Also, if you're a Northern Protestant, please keep in mind that many of the people in the South that you're calling nuts are of the same denomination that you are. They're Baptists, Methodists, Pentecostals, and so forth. And I've met as many hardcore fundamentalist Christians in the North as I have the South. They're just a little more spread out and interspersed with the thicker population, but there are just as many here. And really, this applies when we're talking about anybody's religious beliefs, whether they're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, whatever the case might be. To look down upon them for those beliefs really is judgmental and just plain old disrespectful, whether you agree with those beliefs or not. Now here's one stereotype that really just gets me. They're all racist down there in the South. This one's especially near and dear to my heart because since I am white and because I grew up in the South, people just assume that I am a rebel flag waving, card carrying, KKK loving racist. However, I dated some black chicks in the past. I almost married a girl who was of multiple ethnicities. And right now, about 75% of my friends happen to be non-white just because of the neighborhood I live in. So you don't have to be any particular ethnicity to be my friend. I'm not racist. Also, let's shine the back on you, you northerners up here, up on your high horse. See, racism is not just a southern phenomenon, as many people of color will tell you. I've lived in Kentucky, Tennessee, the birthplace of the KKK, and now I've lived in Philadelphia. And I can tell you there's just as much racism up here, if not more, than there is in the South. See, just because the North didn't believe in enslaving black people back in the day didn't mean that they liked them or they wanted to have them around. Also, the North is populated by a lot of diverse immigrant populations from all over the globe who are numerous enough to be able to clump together with their own like and to hate everybody else around them. So, what's my point in this rant about northern racism when we're supposed to be talking about the South? Well, it all goes back to that expression about the pot calling the kettle black. So while we're on that vein of thought, let's just keep going with it. Here are some of my specific observations about racism in the North. Many Greeks happen to think that they are better than everyone else. If you saw that movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, there is an element of truth to that because, well, I'm married into a Greek family. I know a lot of Greek people, and yeah, it's kind of true. Many Italians think they're better than everyone else, especially. They hate blacks, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, and anybody else that moves into their neighborhood that make it less Italian. In fact, in southern Philly, Barack Obama is hated every bit as much as he is in rural Tennessee. And as an aside, South Philly Italians are some of the most racist people I have met anywhere in any of my travels in my entire life. A lot of Jews don't like non-Jewish people moving into their neighborhoods. If you try and get an apartment or a job or anything else in a Jewish neighborhood, if you're not Jewish, forget it. I've also known a lot of Indians that maybe don't specifically hate anyone, but they would really rather their son or daughter marry another Indian and, say not a white person or anybody else. Here are some more examples of northern racism. Black people tend to make a lot of assumptions about white people, especially when the topic of racism comes up, and so a lot of black people tend to not like white people. Now, I can't judge on that since I've never been black and I've never had to experience what they've experienced. One dude was telling me that when he was a kid, now we're talking about the 80s still yet, if he walked into a store, he had to make sure he knew how to get out of there just in case some white kids came in and started trying to cause trouble for him. So not for nothing, black people have a reason to be a little paranoid when it comes to how others view them. However, I've also met black people who are just as racist as any cross-burning redneck in the South could ever think about being. There's a lot of black people who are racist against whites, non-Americans of all sorts, and even black people of other social classes. Now, generally speaking, white people in the North of any background are just as likely or unlikely to be racist as any white person in the South. Here's the difference, though. Here is the key point. And this comes from a particular person who happens to be black, and he's experienced a lot of racism. He told me, they're just more polite about their racism up here. See, they put a smile on their face, and they're kind to people of all races and backgrounds, especially in the workplace, because there it's very important. However, if their daughter were to date a black guy, there's an expression about defecation and a masonry product that comes to mind. See, behind closed doors, this would be a very heated discussion, because they do not want their daughter marrying a black guy. They just wouldn't say that out in public because that's impolite and you're not supposed to say that. Now let's talk a little bit, though, about stereotypes that Southerners have of Northerners. First of all, they think that all Northerners are, well, fill in the blank with whatever expletive you want to. I'm going to say jerk. Why don't we go with that? As much as Southerners will put on the sugar as thick as they possibly can when they're talking to you to their face, only to backstab you later, Northerners tend to cut to the chase and get directly to the point of what they think. Now, Southerners will take this as being abrupt and rude, but at least it's honest. You know where you stand with a Northerner, generally speaking. However, fakeness and backstabbing, those aren't exclusive to the South. Northerners can certainly do that too, especially in a corporate environment, but generally speaking, a Northerner's going to be more direct in what he has to say. I appreciate that personally. Also, some of the most polite people I've ever met happen to be in the North, actually in Manhattan, for example, contrary to pop culture and some of the cartoonish portrayals in the media of New York City. It may be disingenuous, just like people in Kentucky who call you hon, but hey, it at least feels good. Here's the next one. Northerners are a bunch of godless, heathen, liberal socialists. Well, there's as many churches in the North as there are in the South, as we talked about in another slide. In fact, the forefathers of many of the northern colonies were straight-laced Puritans, Quakers, and Amish, some of the most religious people you can find. And there are plenty of ultra-conservative Republicans in the North as well. And just like the South, the further you get from a major city, the redder the politics get. But even in the South, if you're in the middle of a major city, it does tend to be more liberal and democratic. So the only difference in the North is that from Wilmington, Delaware, all the way up to Boston, Massachusetts, the Northeast is one big continuous city or the suburbs of cities. But now in central Pennsylvania, northern New York, or wherever it was Bob Newhart lived, it was very firmly conservative and red politics. Now, as far as prejudicial terms like socialist, heathen, liberal, all that stuff go, you got to stop watching the Fox News. It'll rot your brain out. By the way, did you know that Fox News is headquartered in New York City? Right in the middle of all the heathens and the liberals and the socialists? What do you think about that? Here's another interesting stereotype of Northerners. It's way more dangerous up in the North. If I go up there, I'm liable to get killed by gangs, muggers, murderers, or psychos. Well, once again, you have pop culture to thank for this, with its fascination with crime in the big city, like Law and Order in New York City, or wherever else you can think of. But now, per capita, New York City actually has a lower crime rate than some of the counties in the South. It's actually safer to be in Manhattan than, well, a lot of places you can be in the middle of nowhere out in the South. And really, anywhere that social imbalances exist, there is going to be a higher crime rate, and most of that is related to drug abuse. This includes rural towns anywhere and everywhere in America that are infested with meth and OxyContin and all kinds of other stuff. So if someone needs a fix and they don't have money, they're just as likely to rob you if you live in the South as they are if you're in the North. Now we've covered a lot of the common stereotypes about the North. Let's look at some of the facts about it. It is more diverse than the South. There are more people from more places and more diverse backgrounds than what you're going to find in the South, where most of the people happen to be white. It is more thickly populated than the South. And since there are more cities, more population, industry, commerce, there tends to be more wealth in the North. The cost of living in a lot of places in the north, though, is way higher because there is more money. And since the population is higher, there are more things available that wouldn't normally be available in a rural town in the south, such as more shopping, more malls. You usually are closer to an airport. There's more stuff for your kids to get involved in, like artsy fartsy schools, or if you want them to take them to a place where they can do rock climbing indoors, or they want to play lacrosse, whatever. Or maybe you have at least 3 theme parks within a 2-hour drive of your house, whereas if you live in the south, you have to make a 6-hour trek to whatever major city you can find that happens to have some sort of theme park. That's the difference we're talking about. And since people in the north do tend to have a lot more money and a lot more nice stuff around them, they do tend to be a little more hoity-toity and snotty about it. Not just against Southerners, but really anybody with less money and less class than they have, such as poor people in the neighborhoods, which ties in a lot of ways back to some of the points we talked about with Northern racism. Now let's talk about some facts about the South, and you might notice I have a little bit more to say here. It is less diverse than the North, and non-whites do not get the same level of respect. See, if you're non-white and you live in the North, that you have enough other non-white people to back you up that it's not as much of a problem, but in the South you're pretty much on your own. You think about it, the Civil War was about slavery, and the post-Civil War movements like the KKK and the Jim Crow laws didn't help anything, so a lot of those old attitudes are still around. And as time goes on and as generations pass, people are tending to be less racist, but it is still there. Also, it is more sparsely populated in the South, meaning that you tend to have more wide-open, quiet spaces to enjoy, especially since there isn't much else to do. There is much less wealth in the South. One town may be built around a single industry or even a single factory, and when that goes bust, people have to pack up and move or buckle under and become poor, or start doing something else like selling drugs or making moonshine or whatever. Many actually grew up in total poverty, literally going days without food sometimes. I hear people tell me stories about when they were kids and they would literally be starving for days at a time. So Southerners do tend to be less materialistic and more content with what little they have when they are poor. The cost of living in the South tends to be a lot less. Related to that, there are far fewer taxes in the South too, depending on where you live. In Tennessee, I didn't pay a state income tax. Also, my neighbors in Tennessee who owned their home only paid a few $100s in taxes per year, versus right now, here in the north in Pennsylvania, I'm paying thousands of dollars in taxes every year, which is kind of a ripoff because our school still sucks here, but anyway, that's another topic. Since the population is lower, once again, there is less special stuff or opportunities to enhance oneself with culture, as somebody might put it. So if your daughter wants to take ballet lessons, well, forget it. Your son wants to play lacrosse, forget it. If you want to go see a play, well, you got to drive over to a major city a few hours away to do it. If you want to do anything else hoity-toity like that, well, you should probably move up to the north if you're really into stuff like that. If, once again, if you can handle the cultural differences of coming from the South and living in the North, and that's not easy. Now, generally speaking, life in the South is just a lot slower than in the North. There's no need to get in a hurry going anywhere, doing anything. Nothing to get your drawers in the wad about. Just relax, go with the flow, it'll be alright. So, what does all this boil down to? Well, the North and the South have very, very different cultures. Instead of judging the other culture as being deficient to yours somehow, simply acknowledge those cultural differences and try to be understanding of them. Also, when you're tempted to pass judgment on the other culture, be sure to notice that rafter in your own eye. Remember we talked about Northerners think the Southerners are racist, but they're also racist. Whatever negative you can say about the other culture, something equally negative, if not the exact same negative thing, can be said about your own. And finally, try not to judge a place that you've never been to. Just because you saw it on TV doesn't mean you know everything about it, so try and get out and go see the world. That's all I have to say. Thanks for watching.